Hello, Hollywood Times viewers. Judy Shields here. Today we welcome director Kyle Portbury, who is an Emmy Award winning and three-time Australian Directors Guild nominee. His latest film, The Hopeful, will be released nationwide on April 17th and 18th in partnership with Fathom Events, Hope Studios, and Kyle Portbury Films. Well, hello there, Kyle.
Hey, how are you, Judy? Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So, are you here in the States?
I am. I'm already here in Los Angeles. We've got our world premiere is taking place on Monday, so very exciting.
That's going to be truly exciting. I think it's over in Universal City, I
It
believe.
is, yeah, the AMC on Universal City Walk, yeah, which is a fantastic location.
Yeah, the Hollywood Times is going to be there on the red carpet. I'm excited to
Yes.
meet you in person. Well, I have to say, what a wonderful and uplifting film this truly is. How did the
Oh,
script
thank
make
you.
its way to you? It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, well, so it's a really interesting journey on this film. It was originally shot at the same time as a six-part mini-series that I also directed a number of years ago. So it was one of those things where it's existed for a while, just needs the resourcing to get done. So, everyone else was focused on the series, and I always knew because they were shot at the same time, and this happens quite often, right? Like Baz Luhrmann just did this with Faraway Downs, but in the reverse. So he shot Australia, and he always had in the plans that there was this huge big series, and he just never got around to doing it until COVID hit, and then he was like, well, I can't go make films at the moment, so I might revisit that series that I intended to do back in 2008. And he ended
Oh,
up, and actually his colorist, so the same Brett Manson who colored Elvis for Baz Luhrmann, did The Hopeful as well, and also did Far Away Down. So, there's a really interesting connection with that kind of mode, I guess, of shooting stuff at the same time as you do a series or the other way around. Mark Burnett did it with the Bible. Remember that 10-part
yeah.
series that he did? And then like 2, 3 years later, he released Son of God in cinemas, which was, I think, 100-minute feature film. So it just takes you a little while. Like I always had the idea that this story had a beautiful cinematic telling that was very, very different. So the series looks at characters that the film doesn't necessarily focus on, right? So it's almost like looking at a story from this angle and then shifting around 180 degrees and looking at it from this angle through a completely different set of character eyes. And I think that's, yeah,
Wow.
it's quite wonderful because it took 10 years to make this film. So by the time when we started post-production in
Yeah.
2022, like, because this is just how it happens. Like you've got to, it's a significant amount of money to raise to make a movie, as you know.
Hmm.
Um, and it was good because I got the first day that I got into the edit suite, I suddenly realized actually this film's been waiting for me to catch up to it because there's certain things that wouldn't have been possible up until that point. So
Hmm.
either just, maturity of storytelling, you're 10 years older, so you've had more
Wow.
life experience and stuff happen to you, right? So you just the way that you look at the world is different. And also then you've got more industry connections and you had then one of the really key collaborations on this film, which actually really influenced the edit in a really fascinating way. So my good buddy Jonas Myron, who, if you've listened to some Andrea Bocelli songs,
Yes.
The Greatest Gift, Gloria, The Gift of Life. He's also worked with Celine Dion and Barbara Streisand, Lauren Daigle. Just really, really, and also I found out last night some really it's like I didn't realize he has worked with quite a few rock artists as well. So we were chatting last night at dinner, and I was like, really? That's like quite big acts that you've heard of. So it was really interesting. He and I worked on another feature film that he was musical director on, and I was in the writing room for it at the
Oh, okay.
time. And we worked out that we have a very similar way of approaching. So even though I'm not musical and would never claim to be, I don't sing, I don't play an instrument, but rhythm and
Yeah.
timing for some reason I get quite well.
Hmm.
And he and I in the process of talking through how we would like to work together with music in film, if we ever got the opportunity, kind of realized that we had a very collaborative way of doing that, right? Like
Yeah.
that iron sharpens iron kind of push and pull thing. So even before we, I think it was May of 2022, before I'd even worked out whether or not the financing was in place, I kind of sent
Yeah.
him a really rough assembly, which is always a bit scary, right? Like you kind of like, all the caveats. And then in the end, you just go, look, if you're inspired by anything, see what comes out. And 4 days later, he sent me back two of the most incredibly beautiful demos I've ever heard. One of those songs you can already get on the places that you do all your streaming. So Made for You,
Really?
which released today, actually. Like if you go to Spotify or iTunes or Apple Music, you'll be able to stream it right now.
He wrote those
Yeah,
songs for
so
you for the
they
movie?
were 100% written just for the film. That was the only reason that they exist. And they kind of, as he describes it, they kind of just flowed out of him in the course of an afternoon. So he wrote Made for You first. I think,
Mhm.
yeah, I think he wrote Made for You first. And then Hope is on the Way came out basically straight away. And then he went with his engineer and recorded them. And I love the story that like he was like, well, Kyle only asked for one. Which one do I send him? And his engineer was like, you have to send him both. They're incredible songs. Like you've got to let him choose. And of course, when I listened to both of them, it actually changed the whole way that I was approaching the edit. Um, what
Wow.
I heard made me think about that story differently, which is how it's actually how I think collaborations should work, right? Like film's a
Yeah.
team sport. So you should be influenced by your collaborators and allow their amazing artistry and craft to shift again. It's like shift that degree where I'm looking at this from. So what ended up happening is that when I got into edit with Bin Lee, my editor, he and I sat down. I was like, what would happen if Hope is on the Way became Miller's theme, and actually we put a piece of it here and a piece of it here and a piece of it here, and we were like, oh wow, this kind of works, right? And then we did the
Yeah.
same thing with Made for You as Ellen's theme, and then the guy, so our composer Blake Robinson and Jones, then when we kind of were ready to present that edit, both went, oh my goodness. So what would happen if the first time we hear that song, we tonally change that so that it's representing Miller's like inner voice and there's an unsureness to it. And so it was incredible because then they got re-inspired by what we had done, and then what ended up being the songs and how they function in the film is actually quite unique. I don't think I've ever seen songs in a film that isn't a musical chart the course that these two songs do. Like they're very deeply integrated in the story fabric, and also they're actually the character voice in that moment, right? They're giving you a very different beat and a different note to what you're seeing and what you're hearing in the dialogue. So all of a sudden you get this moment of almost inner voice coming out of those characters through the song. And it's, yeah, that three-act structure that it ended up in was all just, it kind of organically happened out of just letting the inspiration of your collaborators affect you and do that. And that happened across the board. That happened with Brett doing the color grade. It happened with Glenn Butler, who did the final mix, who's also worked on, quite a number of the Mad Max Furiosa team, worked on the sound side. Jane Campion's Power of the Dog, Matt at Mighty Sound in Sydney, did an incredible job for us. I mean, it was interesting because we we kind of had this dream post-production that doesn't happen a lot. And even, a lot of the seasoned industry veterans that were working with us would say to me regularly, they're like, Kyle, we don't really know what's going on with this, but I hope you realize this is not normal, and it opened up, because this is a film about a community of faith, it opened up them asking me a lot of questions about, like, because they're recognizing a sequence of providential events that is very unlikely, right? So any one of those things on its own in isolation, you would go, oh, okay, well, you're just lucky, or you're good at talking to people. But if you start looking at 10 to 15 of them in a row and you're like, yeah, nobody's that lucky, and I'm certainly not that good, right? So it's quite fabulous, particularly on a film where that faith And not that I would categorize it necessarily as a faith film. I mean, it's the same as going, well, nobody ever goes, is that a horror film? They go, well, it's a film that happens to be in the horror genre, right?
Yes, there you go.
And I think we've kind of typecast in a bad
Yes.
way faith films by calling them faith films first, because it's almost like, where they're not really movies, but it's just a film about characters who are having the same universal struggles that everybody does, right? It just happens that these guys do it in the context of a faith community, right? But just because you're not in that faith community doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to engage with those characters in the same way that you would, for instance, so they go through a very familiar human pattern where we anticipate something and then we're disappointed when it doesn't pan out quite the way we expected it to. And then we have to persevere our way through this new normal that disappointment has created. That's not unique to Christianity or Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism or no-ism,
Yeah.
right? Like that's just a human experience. And I think when you look at characters as humans and you go, okay, so where's the relatability here? Where's the humanity in this person? So even though they're in a location that we don't recognize, in circumstances we might not relate to, we absolutely get the fear and the joy and the romance and the falling in love and the falling out of love and the arguing with your wife or the arguing with whoever it be, right? Like those very human emotions and those very human I guess, wants and desires that we all
Yeah.
have are what make movies movies. That's why we go to the cinema, right, Judy? Like I go there because I want to ride that. I
Yes.
want that ride that the filmmaker has crafted for me. I want to sit in a theater and I want to be able to get transported and then challenged by these circumstances and people that I've met. And I think what's beautiful in The Hopeful for me is that you can do, it's one of the rare films this year that you can do with your whole family in that vein, right? Like it's not a kid's
Mhm.
film,
Right.
but it's a film that kids can enjoy, just like grandparents can enjoy, just like adults can enjoy. Like the age range is really broad with this movie. So,
Yes.
we've got kids as young as 5 walking out of preview screenings, absolutely loving it with their parents and their grandparents,
Yeah.
which how wonderful is that, right? Like particularly as a filmmaker who has kids, my kids are 9 and 11. It's beautiful to be able to share an experience together as a family, and it speaks to all of the generational age ranges in a very different
Exactly.
way, right? Like the kids are relating to it and they're thinking and feeling and doing very differently to how I would. And that's kind of fun,
Yeah.
So the conversation that you then have after the film, either out in the lobby or at dinner afterwards,
Yeah.
which
On the
is
way home.
after right, it's half the joy of going to the cinema because you have to go out, like it's an event that you get to go to. So, when it comes out in theaters on April 17 and 18 next week, that's an opportunity that there's
Yeah.
not a lot of films are offering at the moment. That really great family experience. And, I would encourage people not to look at it as like, oh yeah, but with faith films, like it's actually just a great story
It's
about
a true
people who really
story.
existed. It's a
A
true
true
story. So
story. That's
all
what helps too, right there, folks.
right there. And so one of the fabulous things is you go look up a couple of the key characters, right? So you go have a look at Ellen, who uh, before she married her husband James
James.
was Ellen Harmon. She marries her husband and now, is known in this faith community as Ellen White. But when you
Yes.
have a look at what she has, I guess, first of all, she had a third grade education and she's a woman in a man's world in the
Mm.
1800s. And then you have a look at what she was able to persevere through and the legacy that she has left. And
Yes.
you're looking now at the largest Protestant healthcare network of hospitals on the planet, 500 plus hospitals in 65 countries, right?
Yes.
Literally the legacy of a person with a third grade education,
Yeah.
And then add on top of that, ADRA, which is the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, one of the largest humanitarian organizations on the planet in 125 plus countries.
Yeah.
She is still to this day the single most translated non-fiction female author of all time, with a third grade education, Judy,
I mean, can you imagine
right?
the people spend thousands to get an education in college and then they don't even have a job?
Like and she didn't, and it's not like she didn't pay a high price for this, right? And a
Yeah.
lot of these things she had no idea of, like she was an adolescent, got a rock thrown at her and hit her in the face when she was younger in primary school, elementary school age. And so her health was very, very poor for a big chunk of her early life, to the extent where, they didn't think that she would actually have a long life,
Yeah.
you know. And that kind of gets alluded to with her sister. And, there's a moment where they're really like going at each other about what's going on, and the sister kind of does a really cuts her down and says, look, you know this is no way to get attention, right? Like, we know that you're not going to get married, you're not going to have a contribute in any meaningful way. It really just knocks her down. And it's fascinating to me that you look at the things that she had to struggle against, the prejudice that she had to work through, um, and also on top of that, female in a man's world, because you're talking about religious circles in the 1800s, you
Yes.
know. So I'm inspired by characters like that. I'm like, what makes you tick that you can stick with something in the face of ridicule and, and almost sometimes in the face of evidence, right? Like she really held on to this really beautiful character of Christ that she had seen early on before. So there's, one of the other characters that we talked about thematically, William Miller, was a deist and found through biblical studies. So had this event happen to him in the War of 1812, and a shell landed in the middle of the soldiers, the group that he was with, killed everybody except him.
Yeah.
And he was the only one left alive and didn't have a scratch on him. And he did that classic thing that everyone, I think, would do in that situation, would be like, first of all, what just happened and why me?
Mhm.
Right. And then you're going to have PTSD over that, right? Like you're
Yes.
going to really be in a bit of a mess and trying to work out why this happened to me.
Yes.
And he was a unique character because he was what's called a gentleman farmer in this era. So he was very well read, right? Quite wealthy,
Yeah.
and didn't, wasn't out there plowing the fields himself. Like, he had people doing that for him. So he had time to wander around and do so. His library is very vast. He, had works from Voltaire and Sir Isaac Newton, and just really poured into the great thinkers of his day and past days, but couldn't find any really satisfying answer to why him. And then, almost in desperation, his wife kind of just went, well, why don't you just pick up a Bible and at least cross it off, right?
Yes.
And so he did that. And then, in his words, he found a friend in Jesus. And again, that's really fascinating to me too, because here's a guy who's had no real, and in fact, vehemently did not like the preaching that he heard in the churches around him. His whole family were Baptist. At this
Yes.
point, this is the Great Awakening era. There's a lot of fire and brimstone getting thrown at you from the pulpit, across all generations. It's not unique to one. It's, you know, dare I say, similar to right now, right? Like, we're
Yeah.
looking at an era right now where there's a lot of fire and brimstone being thrown out from Christianity. So, which is not appealing even to Christians. Like, I don't find that appealing.
Nope.
That's not an appealing trait that. And so he finds this picture of Christ that he's never seen before. And that's actually what he goes out and preaches, right? Like, he goes from town to town. One of the towns he goes to, Ellen comes along, and because she's sick and in need of healing, she hears this different character that he's presenting. And she says to her parents afterwards, I've never heard Jesus described as a healer before, right? I've heard of his wrath and his
Yeah.
judgment, but he's healing.
I was
Like, I've
taken
not.
by
So
that.
right, like, so you can
Yeah.
see how these people, and this is what I love about films like it's similar, in ways like when I watched Oppenheimer, you know that a guy built a bomb, right? Like, that's just the detail of it, right?
Yeah.
But what's going on in his personal life and the things that drove him, both towards and away from that, and the wrestles and the struggles that he was going on. I mean, that's why we go to cinema. Like,
Yes.
we want to know the sinewy fiber of people's life. Like, why do you do what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's a really great exploration. I like being provoked by characters. I like sitting there and going, who would I be in this story? Would I be the person heckling, you
Mm-hmm.
know, as somebody that gave all their money away to this cause, and then, you know, Christ doesn't return in 1844. And the next day you wake up and you're like, oh boy.
Yes. What do I
So I
do
don't have
now?
a house. Yeah, I don't have a house. I have no clothes except the clothes on my back. Yeah, and I had no plan post this, you know.
Yep.
And now you go from high status in society to very, very low, and in fact, everybody ridiculing you quite mercilessly.
Yeah.
Um, that's fabulous. And I like to sit there and go, well, who would I be? Would I be the sister who's going, you know, forget this, you're never going to get married to
Yes.
do that, right? You're going to be that person, mate. To be honest with you, and this, Judy, this is what fascinates me about like getting like great cinema
Yeah.
forces you to sit there and go, oh, I could be the bad person in this scenario,
Yes.
couldn't I?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like we all like to think that we would be the hero, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I
Doesn't always
always love
happen.
there's that great well, it doesn't always happen. And I think if you think that you're always going to be and you don't reflect on the possibility for you to be a terrible human being, you may end up just being a terrible human being because you didn't reflect on your capacity to do that. And conversely, you know, that I just think there's a lot to be discovered when you have that conversation with other people afterwards, right? And you'll go, oh yeah, like I actually was that guy walking past heckling, you know, like that would have been probably me because I did that the other week, right? And you'll have a laugh about it. But then you try and go, right, well, maybe this time I might be, instead of the person putting fear and prejudice out into my community, maybe I'm gonna surprise my community, and I'm going to be the person that puts hope and healing into it. Just, you know, even if it's just in your little tiny sphere of influence, you know, you don't need to have a legacy that is, you know, Ellen White's legacy, right? You don't need to be that. You can have a legacy that can be two or three people that you've actually shown grace to, or you know, you noticed that they needed, you know, it's a single mum and you notice that she needed some extra help in some way, like a car needed new tires and you just anonymously did that, right? Like there's just little things I think that we can all look and go, like, what is the hope and the healing that I can put into the world? Because a lot of films at the moment are they're kind of reflecting where we are, you know, where it's a little bit dark and a bit scary in some places,
Yes.
you know. And I think that it's nice to have a film like The Hopeful, which isn't saying that that doesn't exist, but is offering a way of persevering through that and looking at the world, not so much as to what you can get out of it, but what you can put back into it. You know, how can you be those, you know, in great Christian terms, tagging your hands and feet, right? Rather than being the beat you over the head with it, for want of a better word. And that I just think that that's a great way to look at film. It's just character exploration, right? You know,
You're going to
it's
make me cry. This is the most amazing interview I've had with the director about their film. I mean, you need to take this, it's going to be converted to a YouTube video, and you need to put it
brilliant.
everywhere so that everyone can see. I'm telling you, folks, after you hear what he has just said, you will go to the movies and see a movie differently. And this would should be the first one that you try everything that Kyle has told you about the experience a movie like this, because it shouldn't be, as you said, maybe titled faith-based, but it should be family friendly first, you know,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it's such, and I can't wait to share it with my sons and grandsons because it's just amazing.
Oh, that's
And you talked
fantastic.
about
Yeah.
Jonas, who I've interviewed. He's amazing,
Yes. Yep.
amazing. And but let's talk a little bit about the cast, how they were amazing.
Mm.
How did you find them? Let's talk a little bit about them because they helped with the
Yeah,
movie.
they are an incredibly talented group of people. And, you know, like everyone from Tommy, who plays Ellen,
Ellen.
um, Bill Lake, who plays William Miller, Tim Coderre, who plays Joseph Bates, Michael Mancini, who's now, I mean, some of the guys in this, he's now a one of the Canadian government attaches in trade and commerce in
What?
their Tel Aviv. Yeah. So
Wow.
like, I mean, he's one of the most incredible characters in this film. Plays a guy called Joshua Himes, who's this fantastically flamboyant, almost promoter of religion, right? Like
Yes.
in this era, he had this chapel that everyone went and kind of railed against stuff, or
Yes.
debated. And I think Henry David Thoreau went there at some point. So it was, these guys are characters, and Michael really brought that to life. There's a professional, actors from Canada. I don't think most of them had ever heard of these people or the movement that they,
Yeah.
I guess, pioneered. But really approached it with a lot of like research and interest and excitement. And anytime you give an actor real people, there's typically from this era as well, there's a lot of research information, and they dug into this like you wouldn't believe, like really poured their heart and soul into it. Um, I actually personally think, Tommie's performance as Ellen in this is
Oh,
just
it is.
it's an absolute powerhouse of a performance. She is a completely unique,
Yes.
singular talent. Just a really great collaborator as well. And I'd say in the same way that we were talking about Jonas, um, the collaboration that Tommie and I did on this, I mean, it's a difficult role to pull off. Like you've got to have brevity, but a huge amount of gravitas.
Yes.
There's some really deeply emotional engagements as well that you've got to make with, particularly, actors have got a tough gig because you can't lie about that emotion. You can't pretend to feel something. You
Yeah.
have to actually feel it, and you have to do it, for me, take after take after take after take sometimes, right? Because we're trying to get that moment where, I put myself in the audience's perspective. The audience doesn't care how long it took you to shoot it. They don't care how hot it was that day. They don't care what was going on in your personal life when you came to
Hmm.
set, right? They just want you to tell them a great story.
Hmm.
So I sit behind monitor. My crew laugh at me when I'm directing because I sit behind the monitor. I'm riding that roller coaster that
Good.
I'm wanting my audience to ride, right? Like,
Yes.
so if we almost get there but not quite, all right, we're gonna have to do another take. Okay, we didn't quite, I didn't quite get that full stop on that moment that you need, or that emotional punch. You need to feel the gut punch, because if I don't feel it through the monitor, there's no point looking at it on set with your eyeballs, because that's not what people are going to be doing. They're going to be looking at it on a screen. So if
How smart.
it's not pushing out of that screen and affecting me, then it's not going to affect you either. So she was incredibly willing to just go there with me. We would make discoveries, and all the cast. Stephen, who plays her husband James,
Yes.
was the same. Just really committed to giving these people the life that they required.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
have to feel like these are people that really exist, and that they have that, exactly what I was talking about, that they have those same wants and desires, and like fears and doubt. And if you don't see that, you don't see it, and therefore that person's not real. So
Yeah,
it's
it's I want to tell Tommie when I meet her on
oh
Monday is I
yeah.
have to tell her she would be an amazing, not to take this away from her, she'd be amazing at silent actress. Her facial expression, her eyes. I mean, I found myself just glued to watching her facial expression,
So
the way her eyes
some
move. She's
people, yeah,
silent.
some people just have that. It's like some actors just have that ability to just
Yeah.
draw you in on screen, right? Like they
Yes.
just have something that happens when a camera lens pops up on them.
Yeah.
And it's an openness, right? Like she's just very open to allow
Yeah.
you to see through into the vulnerabilities again, which is really, you're laying yourself, your soul bare on camera for
Yeah.
everybody. Um, it was fun for me because I trained professionally as an actor, so I guess I probably lean more to the actor's director side of that
Oh, got it.
equation, and so
Yes.
I find it really um, not easy, but I understand the language of what I'm asking a performer to do, right? So
Yeah.
you can really work collaboratively in that sense, because I know exactly what I'm asking of them, and they know that I know what I'm looking at, right? So if
Yes.
if it looks like it's the idea of an emotion, I'm going to nail you on it straight away, right? I'm going to walk up to you very quietly, and I'm going to go, I'm just going to say, so, that moment when he walks in the door, given everything that we're talking about has happened, how do you feel about him? Right? And that's what you have to do. You have to just
Yes.
ask questions about look at that guy when he walks through the door. Is he annoying you in this moment? Do you want to damage him? Okay. So you work out what it is, that's both appropriate for the character and needed for the story. And then when you find it, you go, right, let's see that. And then you go and you do another take, right? And because you're able to be specific about what it is that, the door opens and he walks in and you can see it straight away, right? It's like, oh, okay. Like she just wants to just damage this guy because of whatever we just saw before in the previous scene, right? Like it's a constant, because we do this all the time in real life, right? Like somebody does something to us and then they come in another day and we're still harboring that grudge, right? And we go,
Yes.
okay. Oh no, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me, right? And they're like, really? Because you sound so, no, I'm not upset. I don't know what you're talking about, right? We do this for nothing.
Yeah.
Actors have to push all of the life that they're currently leading out the window for those moments.
Wow.
And then re-allow those moments in their actual life to shine through again. Like it's a hard craft. And when you see a group of people, particularly, my cast on The Hopeful were so committed to that excellence, that, it just makes collaboration and being on set every day and working, it's the same with your crew. Like when your crew are like, okay, we get what you're doing, Kyle. So we're going to go that extra mile. We're going to do the hard yards where, it's a family, it's a team sport, and I think when people have hard experiences, if you're acting like this is my movie and look at what I've created, you're being completely disingenuous to the 100-odd people for whom you would not be able to be there doing it without, I think that to me is the most fun of storytelling in cinema, or television, is that it's a team sport, and I love team.
Yes.
Team is fabulous. Like you get to share all the highs and lows together, right? Like it's a great way to approach it. And then it becomes not, well, and I think too, like it has to be, a film can't be my story when it hits cinema screens. It's got to become the audience's story, right? Otherwise it's not it's not a movie anymore. It's a vanity piece.
Yes.
And
That's
and
true.
I think if you have that in mind all the time, that this cannot ever be Kyle's story. It has to be our story. So I do that from the second we start. It goes all the way through edit. It's our story, and I want my team to feel like it's as much theirs as it is mine, because it is. That's why I love nothing more than sitting in a dark cinema eating popcorn and getting just transported and walking out of there going, oh, I'm looking at the world just that little bit differently now. It's really made me ruminate, which we don't get to do very often, right? Cinema's actually probably the only place left in the world, really, where you get a chance to just process and reflect and think.
Yeah,
What
exactly. I mean,
what a fabulous place movie theaters are. That community, that camaraderie that we just don't get a lot of opportunities for. The cinema affords us that space to be able to have a shared experience with story. And, I just encourage people to get out there and survive, not just The Hopeful on the 17th and the 18th of April next week, seek out other films, and not just like the big blockbuster ones, right? Go and seek out other films that people have
independent. I
poured,
like the independent films too.
that they've
Yes.
poured, just like I have, my
Forward
heart
film.
and soul into, wanting to tell stories of value that matter,
Yeah.
that give us pause for thought, that challenge us, that make us laugh and cry. And, cinema's joyful, right? Like you can tell, like I love telling stories.
Yes.
It's a beautiful thing, because
I-
those stories are built of relationships, which
exactly.
is the whole point. Yeah.
Yes.
when you go to the Hopeful in cinemas, and there's about 1,000 screens across America covering it in all the main metropolitan areas. So you'll be, if you go to thehopefulmovie.com or fathomevents.com/the hopeful, you'll be able to see that. I almost guarantee you there'll be a cinema pretty close by that'll be
Okay,
carrying it.
good.
And you'll see on there, so we did an exclusive behind the music interview between Jonas and I, and we're getting interviewed by Kevin Alusula from the Pentatonics,
Nice.
just talking about how to create that, collaboration. So there's
Yeah.
a really beautiful conversation, between the three of us. Jonas plays a little bit of the songs, and you just get a
Oh,
bit of an insight, again, like you're getting now, into
yeah.
my enthusiasm for storytelling.
You're a great storyteller.
Well, I mean, I'm just curious about the world, Judy.
Yeah, you should be.
I'm
We all should
curious
be.
about people. Yeah, I'm curious
Good.
about what drives people, and I'm curious about what drives me. So I like to explore that, and I've chosen to explore that through the medium of film and television. Jonas explores that through
Good.
song.
Music.
Peter, the cinematographer, explores that through the camera lens. Tommy and Bill and Tim and Michael and Kate Herman, who plays Lucy Miller in the film, explore that through performance,
Yes.
and actually physicalizing that expression. So, yeah, it's just a beautiful concert of people who are just curious, right? Like
Yes.
and again, that curiosity is what drives great storytelling. Yeah.
Yeah. And you got yourself an amazing movie. I mean, folks, you've really got to go out and see the
Thank you.
Hopeful. It's really good.
Yeah.
And that I love how Fathom brings it. Seems like when I go to the movies at Fathom, seems like the people that are in the audience open up a little bit more. Like they're more, yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I love it when
Yeah.
people get involved in the movie, and don't take away from it, but they add to it.
Yeah.
I love that.
Fathom are a great partner to have for
Yes.
cinema. They love storytelling as much as I love storytelling. So
Yes.
there's a real passion and a drive from them to bring new stories that aren't being told to the cinema. And I think
Yes.
that that's a beautiful thing, right? Like it's like we were saying before, it's a different experience than sitting and watching that on your laptop.
Yeah.
You go and watch it in cinema, it's not the same.
Well, we've had a
Uh,
pleasure speaking with you. I've learned so much. I've always loved movies, but I'm gonna watch them differently after hearing
mm.
everything you had to say. You've inspired me to be a better moviegoer.
Oh, fantastic.
And
Well,
best of
just be a
luck.
curious moviegoer.
Yes, right?
I think that's what it is. Just be curious. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. So instead of Curious George, I'm Curious Judy now.
Nice. Love it.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to the Hollywood Times. And like I said, we will be putting this up on our YouTube channel, Hollywood Times Official, and we'll get that out as soon as possible. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I look forward to meeting you in person on Monday for the premiere.
Lovely.
Thank
Excellent.
you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much, Judy. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
No problem.